In this video, I'm going to share my positive, unmedicated birth story. I did a lot to prepare for my delivery, from taking an incredible birth course, which I will link in the description box, to writing affirmations, to rehearsing with my husband. And one of the things that I think helped me the most was watching and listening to all the positive birth stories that I could. I felt so empowered by other women's delivery experiences, especially when they were similar to the ones that I hoped I would have. And I felt so supported by this community of mamas who I didn't even know, but who had helped me feel so much more confident just by sharing their own stories and reassuring me that it was possible. So if you're pregnant and you're watching this video, I hope you feel inspired and confident that it is totally possible to have an incredible birth experience no matter what type of birth you are planning for. And I would also love to hear all of your stories as well, so let me know how your births went in the comments. For my whole pregnancy, my baby measured 1 week ahead, and the doctor had actually moved my guest date back at my first appointment to July 27th, which didn't surprise me because big babies run in my family, and the same thing happened with my first son. But this time around, I was really hoping to go into labor on my own, so I did start to get a little bit anxious when my guest date came and went and I was still pregnant. A week later though, on August 2nd, which was the exact guest date that I had originally calculated, I went into labor at about 1:30 in the morning. I had been having some prodromal labor, and I'd been waking up at night with contractions for about a month at this point. And I had been at about 3 centimeters for 2 weeks. So the first time I woke up with contractions, I just put on a meditation and went back to bed. And the next time I woke up was about 2 in the morning. It was about 30 minutes later to go to the bathroom. And that's when my body started to clean itself out. I was kind of shaky and I was having some pain in my back with my contractions, which was actually the beginning of my back labor, but I didn't realize I was in labor until a little while later. I actually just wondered if I was getting sick. I went back and forth about whether I should wake up my husband, and it was one of those things where you feel like you know what you're doing, like you're decided, so you go ahead and start doing it, and then all of a sudden change your mind. So I would open the door to the bathroom and walk out into the hall, and then I'd go back in the bathroom and close the door. And that happened like 6 or 7 times before finally I was like, okay, I'm just gonna get in the bath and see if that helps me feel better. And I actually texted my mom to say something like, I'm not sure if I'm sick or if I'm in labor. And I told her I was gonna get in the bath, and if it didn't help, I would wake up my husband and go to the hospital. Little did I know that my husband was actually laying in bed watching the whole thing. He was watching the light in the hall and listening to me go in and out of the bathroom, which was probably hilarious. But anyway, he knew when I turned on the water to the bathtub, he was finally like, hey, are you feeling okay? And I was like, yeah, do you feel all right? Thinking if he was feeling sick too, that maybe we just ate something bad. But he was like, oh, I feel fine. I think you're in labor. And that was when I was like, yeah, okay, this is probably labor. So I got in the bathtub and I started timing my contractions, which were about 2 minutes apart and lasting from a minute to a minute and a half each. And it only took about 10 minutes of this for me to be like, yeah, okay, we need to go to the hospital, because we were planning on delivering at a hospital that was about 45 minutes away. And it took me a minute to leave because I did not want to get out of the bathtub. I kept saying, okay, after this contraction, and then another would come and I'd say, okay, after this one. So I finally ended up getting out and putting a dress on, just a dress, because the thought of bending over with my huge pregnant belly in the middle of contractions to put on underwear sounded like way too much effort. So I left for the hospital in just a dress, and we ended up leaving at about 3:15 in the morning. I thought the car ride was going to be a lot more uncomfortable than it was, but I really got into my breathing and my visualization and worked with the rhythm of my contractions, and that really helped me relax for our 40-minute drive. And once we got there, things got a little bit more intense. So as we walked through the parking lot, I had to squat down when a contraction hit, so that I could really just focus on that moment and breathe until it passed, and then I could stand up and walk again. We had to do that a couple of times on the way in. We got checked into our hospital room just after 4 a.m. and before the nurses did anything else, they read through my whole birth plan and they told me we could absolutely follow it. And immediately I was so happy that I had switched hospitals last minute. I actually ended up switching at 36 weeks. But that was great. And then the nurses started doing counter pressure and showed my husband and my mom how so that they could take over. And once they started, I didn't want them to stop. I had heard that back labor was intense, but it's no joke. And the counter pressure is what made it just a little bit more comfortable for me. So mom, husband, thank you so much. They asked to check my progress, which I was totally fine with because I wanted to make sure my doctor would be notified and get there to deliver my baby. And the nurse who checked me was like, oh. And my first thought was, oh no, I'm still at like 4 centimeters. And she was like, are you sure you don't feel like you need to push yet? And it turns out I was at 8 centimeters. And I cannot tell you how relieved and confident I felt in that moment, just to know that my body was actually doing this and I was already most of the way to having my baby. It felt so good. And by the time they checked my progress, it was probably about 4:15. I had wanted to labor in the tub originally, but things had moved so fast I kind of lost my desire to do that because I wanted to stay close to where I planned on delivering, which was the bed. I went from an 8 to a 9 really fast, but then I stayed at a 9.5 for a few hours because my water was not breaking on its own. I tried a few different positions to try to get my baby to turn because for my whole labor he was sunny side up, which is why I was having back labor, and B, dilate that last half centimeter. So I tried the birthing chair, which I know there are lots of different kinds, and the one that I had was it was a weird little blow up chair thing that was probably really nice if I had been a little bit shorter, but for someone a little bit taller, I personally felt like my legs were squishing my baby and it was really uncomfortable throughout contractions, so I did not like it. But then I tried the birthing ball and I actually didn't like that one either. I tried it for one contraction and ended up just getting right back in the bed. I think it's because my baby was so low, it was just uncomfortable to sit. But there were a few positions that I did like. I tried being on my back with someone putting pressure on my knees and someone putting pressure on my hips. And I also liked being on my knees with my arms kind of hanging over the back of the bed. And it just made it really easy for my belly to hang and my head to relax. And my husband and my mom stood on each side and gave me that counter pressure. And I also labored for a while on my side with a peanut ball between my legs. And I hated getting into this position, but it ended up being one of the most comfortable because it really allowed me to rest in between contractions. And I think I even dozed off a couple of times for just a few seconds, which is incredible that our bodies know to do that, to rest in between. We came prepared. We had oils to smell, lotions for massage, a mini diffuser, which we actually didn't use at all, and a Squishmallow pillow, which was heavily used. We had pictures and words on affirmation cards and an awesome YouTube playlist by Bridget Taylor that I will link. And we kept that on a loop throughout my labor. One of the things that helped me a ton was having a comb in my hand. The idea behind the comb, it sounds kind of weird, but if you have a comb in your hand and you can squeeze it, the idea is that the pain receptors from your hand will get to your brain before the ones from your contractions. So it's kind of like a little distraction. And I squeezed the life out of that comb until they took it to save my hands. But that was actually super helpful. I didn't use all of the things that I planned to use because honestly, in the moment, there are some things you just don't want. But there were some things that I was super happy to have. And even though I didn't look at the affirmation cards, for example, while I was laboring, I think even the act of making them beforehand and surrounding myself with that positivity as I was preparing for my birth helped me a ton. Finally, one of my nurses said, if we just break your water, he will come out so fast. Usually by this point, the waters are broken and it just speeds up labor. That finishes dilation, gets everything moving, and mine was just not breaking. So we could have kept waiting, but I was getting really tired at this point, and I was still a little bit nervous because I was induced with my first, and when they broke my water was when things got so uncomfortable so fast. I ended up having an epidural, and I just didn't think that I could handle any more discomfort at this point in my labor because I was back laboring the whole time, which was really intense, and I was just a little bit anxious about it. I had kind of a break in focus where I was like, wait, it's too late for an epidural, right? Like, I'm actually really close to pushing this baby out and I'm kind of scared. And she was like, no, it's not too late for an epidural, but once we break your water, it will be. And I was like, oh, dang it, I've got to choose. And honestly, if I had had nurses or hospital staff that were pushing me to get the epidural at this point, I probably would have done it. But she was super supportive. And she said, look, I've seen people do this before. I've seen people cope, and I've seen people not cope, and you are coping well. You can do this. And then my husband and my mom jumped in and they were like, yeah, you can do this, and you are doing this. And my husband even joked that I hate tomatoes, which was our code word for an epidural, so that if I ever asked for tomatoes in my labor, he would know I was serious about getting one, because I hate tomatoes. But that is literally all it took for me to regain that confidence. So the doctor came in and broke my water, and I remember him saying, all right, I'm just gonna step out while we wait for you to feel like you need to push. Just let me know when you feel like you need to push. Almost immediately I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna push. I have never felt such an all-encompassing, powerful, insanely strong urge. I had to push and nothing was going to stop me. My body just took over and knew what to do. It was the coolest thing and so weird. The doctor came back in and it took a good 6 or 7 pushes for his head to really descend. And I hit a point where I was like, oh my goodness, what if I can't do this? Because I was pushing with everything I had and I was making noises that I didn't even know I could make. And the doctor kept saying, like, hold that energy in, direct it downward. And I was like, I can't help it. I was just making these crazy noises. Finally, I felt his shoulders descend through my pelvis, and it was the coolest feeling. I actually felt his shoulders on my bones, and I could tell where he was in the birth canal, which was amazing. And he was out. I didn't really feel the ring of fire that people talk about, but I think that's just because I had back labor the whole time, and the discomfort in my spine and hips kind of overpowered everything else. But as soon as he was out, the discomfort went away, and I had the sweetest boy in my arms, and I was so proud of him and so proud of myself for what we just went through, and the intensity of the love that I felt and still feel for this tiny human is indescribable. Oh, his little bum. It's so little. Oh, I love him.
How old is Sawyer?
He's so cute. How much did he weigh?
We don't know.
They haven't
Weighed him yet. 8:06 is the time.
Oh,
We've had him the whole time.
it's 8:06.
Give it to the remind moms that, yeah, it's not left your arm, so.
Yeah, yeah.
So we don't know how much he weighs. What's
How much
your
does he
guess?
feel?